But it's interesting because we've heard from a lot of, apparel retailers
Mhm.
that they are already seeing, right, greater sales of smaller sizes and right, like the
Mm.
traditional size pack, that they do not feel that they are adequately inventoried for this holiday season. And so going back to just the pace of change, and I think that's that, we all have muscle memory from 2020, which is great. But I do think that is, so if I look at so let's start with like Ozempic economy, right? So we have real changes happening there. We have
Mhm.
changes in terms of quality and quantity of what people are eating,
Mhm.
and where they're potentially redeploying kind of money that they would have spent in kind of on grocery. Secondly, if we look at some of the health and wellness, we've been of the belief that we're seeing it's slow but measured, right? Seeing more of health and wellness move into the grocery, and this idea around food prescriptions, food is medicine. That it was interesting. On a personal note, I had gone to Mayo Clinic in Rochester and I was diagnosed with celiac. Nobody knew what was going on. And, you know, this was a while ago. So they use like celiac disease. Once you hear disease, you're like, oh, that's not good. But I didn't know at the time what it was. And so they told me, I'm like, oh, I can't eat barley, wheat, and rye. I can do that. And so their quote unquote like prescription for me was to go back and go to Whole Foods, go to the concierge desk and have them, and which they did. They walked me around the entire store and showed me what I could and couldn't eat. And so we've talked to many grocers who are actually, let's just say, meaning anyone who sells food,
Mm.
um, that this is right, having either a nutritionist or some kind of consultants on staff or having that available through an app, that is a bigger focus for them in the year ahead. And that, I mean, it's like we've heard it in the past, but to hear it at kind of like this level, I think is really interesting. And I I think that the so okay, we're in three, we're third, fourth. I should write these down as we're talking about them. Um, if we think about kind of retail media networks, and first, right, Kroger, Albertsons. Second, some of the activity at Ahold Delhaize, I believe we'll continue to see consolidation and the opportunity for retailers to drive revenue in a new way, right? And it's not just retail media networks, right? It's monetizing their IP and monetizing their data, but that allows the grocery segment to invest more in technology. And I think it goes back to better data, better kind of engagement for the consumer, easier, right, kind of customer journey on an app or online. And so I think that that also is, yes, RMNs and, whatever that kind of carries with it. So better engagement, better kind of, local assortments and whatnot. I mean, there's a million things that that does. But ultimately, I look at it from the grocer's perspective that they now have this other kind of, source of revenue. Thinking about how, what they do with that is, that's, I think there's a lot of places they can reinvest and think about tech. And then the kind of movement into, we keep hearing about smaller package sizes, and it's, everyone's got a reason, why. They think it like now is the time, macro environment, aging population, right? It's a way to like trial, but it doesn't really matter why. I mean, of course the why does matter, but what we're seeing is, and we actually, it might have been Friday, it was Friday end of the day for me. We were talking to a uh emerging brand that's seen amazing success in the pet food space, pet, uh, let's call it supplements. And they were saying that like literally just offering more sizes and smaller sizes. And then what was also, I think it was called, I think, and this is of course like, I think it was called, this was like the craziest thing. I think it was called Quartile. I looked it up on Friday. I think I was pacing, so I didn't, yeah. So this is amazing, Mark. You should look at this after this call. So he was saying that they're using Amazon's Quartile, which is basically to help them kind of just be much more efficient in their advertising, that literally their sales had doubled by week.
Wow. Yeah.
And so you're starting to see, right, this idea around, technology, but, I would say this continuation around, hey, you have to, call it ROAS, but this return on spend, and it's not about, well, of course, for some customers, it's about the circulars and the coupons and all that. But there are, I think, and it's interesting because I talked to him a little bit about like private label, and right, like that is a brand. And so I feel we're still very early, but I think this idea of like private labels as I mean, I don't like the word real brands, but private labels as brands. And, I will tell you, so personally, during the pandemic, our closest grocer, it was actually quite unfortunate. The town that we moved out to, Lidl had bought our grocer, and it was closed for renovations during almost all of the pandemic. So it was unfortunate for them and us, because we had to drive quite far to get groceries. But the closest like full grocer was Aldi. And so I went every week. It was like I'd go Friday at 3 o'clock. It was like my downtime into the week. But I got very used to like buying those brands. So right, we come back to the city, right? And we now still order much of our groceries through Instacart, which actually is another trend I want to talk about, right? And because we want those brands. And so I do think this idea of private labels as not a less than, right? It's not less expensive. It's not, it is the retailer's own brand. And I feel like we hear bits and bites of them talking about it that way. We just haven't necessarily, I just think that and yes, of course, we're seeing them continue to increase in penetration. I just think there's a whole other opportunity to drive growth for private label, and ultimately top line and bottom line. So that, I think, kind of growth through private label. And then I think we're on 7 or we're on 6, but with Instacart and just the whole, I think we should split it up. So right, there's home delivery, and that continues to grow. I think, right, going back to like my China experience, I think in the US it's hard, right? Like I live in an apartment building, so I can't use right, this has always been the problem with Wall Street, right? Is that I can't use my own experience, because if I have a home and someone's delivering groceries in a 2-hour window, I kind of need to be there. That's a long time, right? To be waiting for my groceries, and then, hey, right, they get delayed, always, right? Things happen. And so what we're seeing is, I was with somebody last week who lives in like outside of Lexington, Kentucky. And he said that at his Walmart, he's counted, there's 35 spots for, right, buy online, whatever. It's not pick up in store because it's being brought to your car. And he said they have to wait in line to get one of the spots.
Wow.
And so that success of, right, so that idea that like as a consumer, you're in a bit more of control, right? Especially with groceries and things that are perishable. But I think these new ways of, kind of engaging with the grocer, now that the challenge is, right, there is cost associated with that, which once again, I think you can offset through retail media networks, data monetization, IP monetization, but it does, oh my gosh, I can't believe I said, yeah, it's like 4 years ago, I was talking to people about this. So, and nobody's done it, which is even more upsetting. But this idea, right, once you have that one-to-one relationship with the consumer, right, I am bringing stuff to your car. I know who you are. I know everything you have bought. So why can't I've thought about this, right? Like in the old days, I mean, before there were cars kind of days, right, where you had like the traveling salespeople and right in their buggy, right, they had all these different products. So why can't we, like, I'm very much about this professionalization of the sales associate. I think it, you know, it encourages longevity, engagement, driving your top line. But why can't we, first of all, I think people should be tipped, right, if they're bringing stuff out to the car, number one. And number two, if let's say I'm an associate in that Walmart. I go to this guy, his name is Tyler. If I go to Tyler's car and I know that, he, I know what he's bought for himself and his family. And if I can bring out, like, I don't know exactly how you do this, right? Like, I thought you could bring out, like, if it's, kind of new products that are small, right? Like, we have to think about, what actually makes sense. But I can even say to him, right, we've got, think about, like, sometimes when you check out, right, like, if you buy this right now, right here, right, I can get this, kind of 2-for-1 or whatnot. But this idea, without going into the specifics, that we can engage people, right, like this car commerce, I call it, if you'll allow me. But in car commerce, if we can start to engage people in a different way, and that we get the permission to sell them more and to develop a relationship. And so it's interesting, right, when with Instacart, right, I can now try to book the same person, right, with Shipt, with Target, with Shipt. That's like their big thing, is, right, to be able to book the same shipper. And so when you start to develop, right, relationships, I mean, hey, you used to be going to the grocery and you'd hope you'd see your favorite, kind of cashier. That's what they call them these days. I'm not sure the appropriate term. But that's what my parents used to say, right? They they'd be so excited, right? They'd wait in line, right? They'd wait, like, it'd be 5 deep, right, to check out with this, particular person. And then along those lines, okay, we're gonna go, so 7 and 8, I think. So then, and we can call it BOPIC, buy online, pick up in car, whatever you want to call it, I don't care. But so then, right, we do a lot in the technology space. And so if we think about, right, what's happening with self-checkout, and it was really interesting when we did a lot of research, much to people's surprise, let's call them silver consumers, were the ones who enjoyed it the most. I'm not saying used it, enjoyed it, because they felt they weren't being rushed. They could see the prices, and and they were able to, in a very comfortable environment, if something was more expensive than they thought, they could have somebody who was pretty anonymous, right, take the item off their order. And so that is interesting in terms of thinking, more holistically about people's checkout experience. And then we started to do some work in markets outside the US, where you have a large percentage of silvers. And what we found is that they really enjoyed the opportunity to talk to someone. And so for one of the retailers we worked with, we developed, like, these kind of like slow lanes, if you will. And the whole idea was, like, you could go and have a conversation with the sales associate, right? They weren't, like, being, it wasn't like their metrics, like, they were being dinged. And it's one of the reasons it's funny, like, in Manhattan, I go to Trader Joe's. I have to tell you, during the pandemic, especially, like, when I came back to the city, right? I mean, you just wanted to talk to someone. You didn't even want them to necessarily, like, respond. You just, and I will tell you, I would go to Trader Joe's, and I mean, I would, like, pour my heart out to this complete stranger. I mean, I literally got advice on, like, for, like, my daughter's mental health. I got, like, I didn't even know there's this, like, AMC thing that, like, I don't even know, where you can spend, like, I think it's $22.99 a month, and I can see unlimited movies. So, like, literally, these people changed my life. And it was, and, like, and they were obviously not in a rush. They were there to have a conversation with you. And, like, and now when I go to Trader Joe's, like, I'm so busy observing everybody else, I can't, like, have that conversation. But it is really interesting, I think, in terms of, like, checkout experience. So I think we should make sure, keep my eye on the time, is talk about inflation. So we've done a lot of work on shrink, organized retail crime, things walking out of the store unpaid. And I was originally surprised at the level with which this is happening in food and drug. honestly, I think most people, and it was just, it wasn't any different than it was in any of the apparel. Like it's pretty much as similar across. And if you look at where we are in terms of top line growth, where we are in terms of inflation, our data suggests that, and we haven't published this yet, but hopefully we'll publish it before you do. Either way, it's yours to use. That on average, there's about 150 to 200 basis point impact in top line from product walking out of the store unpaid.
Wow. Yeah, that's huge.
And if you think about where we are with inflation, right? That is kind of almost, it's a little bit less, but it is fascinating to me as we've done all the work. If we didn't, and I don't know, like believe me, we're trying to be very careful around this dialogue and how to kind of lay it out. I'm very fact-based, so I think that may be the best approach, right? We're not saying anything one way or another. We're just saying the facts. And that is, if you think about, I mean, one of the greatest challenges I see in 24, certainly more than 23, is organized retail crime. And it goes back to why I think it's so interesting in groceries, because everyone assumes it's a non-issue. And we can call it shrink, or ORC, but that is a really interesting kind of challenge, and I don't think it's necessarily an opportunity. It is a challenge. And most of these other things, if you think about it, it's truly kind of opportunities, right? It's opportunities for growth, it's opportunities for innovation, and we're not talking, believe me, you and I can talk innovation all day long. I mean, there's really interesting kind of, technology solutions out there that are focusing on grocery, which, I usually say to people, I know we hear from a lot more retailers who are not grocers, but when you look at the dollar volume, right, that's really kind of tree and CPG. And then maybe I have 2 minutes. Maybe I can also just talk about what we think is in the CPG space, and we have a whole advisory team, so we see things. I usually am at the very beginning of a project and the very end. I'm not in the middle, so that I'm exposed to very minimal material, non-public information. But and we're working with most of the CPGs now, the interest in going direct to the consumer continues to be present. We had done a bunch of work in 2020, and I just think there were so many, this kind of digital transformation, there were so many other priorities. But I do think that we will start to see, I want to call it, maybe they're in the batting cage warming up, but I think we're going to start to see just early examples. I know having like PG.com, that doesn't, because the consumer doesn't know, right, what brands are Procter and Gamble, so that doesn't really work. So I think all of these brands have to think about kind of what works and how to kind of put that together in a comprehensive experience for the consumer. But I think this idea that the kind of future of the relationship, and if you think about the data, and I think it's a lot from that perspective that the CPGs feel that the data piece of this is increasingly important, and that's really why they, at least from our conversations, that's why they really want to figure this out. And with so much change happening from the consumer side, I think I'm finding there's more questions right now than there are answers, probably in my entire career. And the right kind of like format, relationship, how to drive that relationship both offline and online, right? And these opportunities for retailers and brands, and for the retailers who are right, who have a brand. But I'll send you, I had actually like typed up, I didn't even, because if I go over there, then it like, then you don't see me. So I'm just speaking from memory, but I'll send you, and I'm sure they're in a totally different order and they may be like construed very differently because I'd done this last night. I'll send you some of what like I thought and put it on paper, and I'll send that to you right after the call. But I mean, hey, I think that 24 is a year of unprecedented opportunity for this sector. And there will also be opportunities, I think, to partner, that whether it's with technology solutions or other, let's just say brands outside of their own space in activations and whatnot. And that, I think I'm really excited to see that. So when we were in, we brought Kroger to China, right? We had this whole thing with like Kroger and Nike and Pure Yoga. And so getting people to kind of like work together who you wouldn't think would be partners, I think is fascinating.